hope that carries through. Okay, so one of the words that you'll hear a lot in programming is first class, and that's just like a way of saying, like what is kind of the most important thing here, right? Or what does JavaScript kind of prioritize? And so the 3 bullets down there is kind of outlines the ways in which functions can be kind of stored or can be seen by other technical aspects of I guess JavaScript really, right? So the first one is you can pass in a function as an argument into another function, right? So far we've passed in things like lists, we've passed in things like arrays, we've passed in things like numbers. Well, functions are another data type, right? So it makes sense that we should also be able to pass them into other functions. And when we do that, the next I will kind of show it will basically be called a callback function, and we can dive into what that means a little bit more. But just know that functions can be treated just like any other variables, especially in terms of us moving them back and forth. Okay. We can also return functions, right? Once again, we can return a string, we can return an object, we can return anything in a function, including another function. So just kind of take that at face value for now. And then 3 is it can be held inside any data structure, which means we can have an array of 5 functions, right, with 5 elements, each element being a function. When we create an object, for example, right, we can have the key be a string, but the value can very well be a function as well. So all of this is to say that wherever you see an array or an object, it could a function could very well be there as well. Okay. Yeah. So when we pass in one function into another function, the function that is being passed in is called the callback function. And this is just semantics here, right? Like operationally, whether or not you call it callback doesn't really matter. And so this side I actually thought was always a little bit confusing, right? Is like we have this function called callback, we pass it into this func runner, and then it theoretically call it callback function. But anywho, yeah, so whatever is being passed in, if it's a function, then it will be known as a callback function. And the interesting thing here is that, normally what I always kind of belabor the point on is like, hey, defining a function does nothing, right, until you run it. And you run it by using the open and closed parentheses, right? Like that's something we've talked about quite a bit. In this case, we define this function, we store it in the callback variable. And notice how when I pass it into line 10, I never invoke it, right? There's no open and closed parentheses after a callback, which means I'm never invoking, right? For all I know, this could be a variable. This could be a string, a boolean, an array, anything, right? Until I use those open and closed parentheses, this is treated just as any other variable. I'm just moving data back and forth. Okay. When I get back to line 5 now, this callback function is the argument, and so in here there comes this parameter called CB, right? And notice how up until line 6, I've still never had the open and closed parentheses after CB either, right? So at this point, it's still just like any other variable to me. But on line 7 is now where kind of the magic happens, is that, well, I have a function, and it's called CB, right? I want to invoke it. How do I invoke it? I use the open and closed parentheses. And only on line 7 is now really line 2 being executed. So if I was to run this in the live environment, this is how it would happen, right? The first line that would console log out is, I start on line 1, I start on line 5, I define a bunch of things, nothing's being used, whatever, we go through it. On line 10, I call func runner. I give the original function into it, and then the original function is going to run, and the first thing it's going to do is say, hey, console log now calling out the CB first. Okay, so that's why this prints out on line 12. And then after it's done printing this out, the next line is, hey, that function that you passed in? Let's actually run it. So now we go back all the way back to line 1, 2, and 3, and we run that, and that's why console.log is printing out calling back on the subsequent line. So if you just think about a function as like any other variable, any other data type, like an object or an array or a string, you should be fine. The only kind of wrinkle there is just to make sure that you understand that functions are executable, right? So I can do callback, open and close parentheses. In here, what I'm doing is basically drawing that same arrow from earlier. now CB and callback are referencing the same exact function. So if I do CB open and close parentheses, it's the same as writing callback open and close parentheses. And yeah, so now we're able to execute. The function. So just be sure both here and here that you're treating whatever function you're passing in as a variable, right? Do not put the open and close parentheses after it, because as soon as JavaScript sees that, they take that as a explicit command to say run this command right now, and you really, for the most part, don't want to in this case until you get to line 7. Make sense, right? A lot of it's very similar to how we talk about objects and arrays. The only wrinkle is that extra invocation there on line 7. So if we were to take a look at this this sequence of events, right? So on line 1, it defines this function called log as a string, or log a string. It takes in a string and it logs it out. So when I call it with apples, at this point, hopefully this is clear to everyone. If it's not, let me know ASAP as possible, because, but this is pretty straightforward, right? Very basic JavaScript. I take in a string and I print it back out to you. Okay. Now let's move on to something a little bit more heady here, which is the idea that I now create this function called calls func with hello. Okay, and what this function does is so here's where you just kind of use your best intuitive judgment as both a code reader and also as a code writer, right? It's like, well, someone's passing to me a argument, okay, and the parameter is called func. So you can just kind of mentally say, okay, so this person is probably going to pass me a function, right? And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm executing the function. In the input, I'm putting the word hello, and I'm returning all of that. Okay, so it may seem a bit heavy, but let's go through it, right? Let's see, we get to line 11 here, right? So we have something called calls func with hello. Okay, what are we passing in here? What's log a string?
Action.
Yeah, it's a function, right? So right now, what is func? By the time we get to line 7. Right, it's this function on line 1. Okay, so by the time we get to line 7, func is basically equal to this function over here, right? So then let's forget about the return right now, right? Let's say I just want to run func and I input in hello. What happens?
You don't have the return?
Yeah, let's say the return is not there. Let's say I just want to run func with the input as the string hello.
So console log hello.
Does everyone else agree? Right? Yeah. So basically, here I'm just doing what I'm doing up here, right? I'm basically just executing this function and giving it a word, and then it's going to console log out hello. Now, when I put the return down here, what happens?
Is it return undefined?
That's guess one.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, so I guess the question here is, what does func of hello return, right? So the question then becomes, well, what is func? Which function is func representing? I'm sorry, Mallory. Okay. Well, no. What is func here? Log a string, right? And so, what does log a string return?
Nothing. Console logs a string, but it doesn't return anything.
Right. So, what does log a string return?
Well, calls func with hello is doing the job of returning what logs a string didn't return.
Well,
Sort of.
well, this is just returning whatever this is going to return, right? So what is func of hello returning? And if we already agreed that func is just the same function as log a string, then the question is, what is log a string returning?
The thinking is like if logs a string said return 1, then calls function with hello would return 1. If it's not returning anything, then it should return undefined. That's how I'm thinking. Console log doesn't return anything, just prints something else.
So lines 1 through 3, that function when I run it, what is it returning?
Should be undefined. It's not returning anything.
Right. There's no return. There's no word called return. Right. Nothing in this function is returning anything. So in JavaScript, what do we return if we don't explicitly tell it what to return? Undefined. Right. So log a string is going to return undefined, which means func is going to return undefined. And in line 7, we are telling it very explicitly, hey, return something. But what are we telling it to return?
Whatever the other functions return.
Right. Which is what?
Undefined.
Undefined. Okay. Yeah. Does everyone like see that? Like not just like, oh yeah, like I'll nod along and hopefully it'll make sense like in 20 minutes because this is the kind of things that you need to be really really comfortable with, right? Like how we execute functions, how we make this work. Otherwise, this is all this can get very messy very very quickly unless you're just very critical with yourself and really say, do I actually understand exactly what is happening in each and every step? Okay. So sucks that I can't copy and paste this this text here. Actually maybe I can. Oh god. Well, this is not good. Oh wait, no, we do have a REPL here. Let's see if that works. No, what is it doing? Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, so let's run this. Okay, so right now this is lines 1 through 5, right? This part makes sense, everyone? We have a function called log a string. And by the way, just even here, what is log a string returning? And how do we know that? String is defined. String is apples. Well, no, console log string is running perfectly well, right? I see it right here.
Whenever the word.
Yeah. Yeah, REPL. White is console logging. Green is returning. Okay. So does this make sense, everyone? Why apples? The word apples is in white, and undefined is in green, right? We're console logging out. We're console logging out apples. If I comment out that, it's still gonna return. Oh. It's still gonna. Wait, why is it doing that? Oh, is it not letting me? Okay, sorry. It's not letting me. Yeah, it's not letting me save it. I'll just copy paste it over to my own thing. Cool. Okay, so here I took out the console logs, right? But the function is always going to return something. If I don't tell it what to return, it's going to return undefined by default, right? And in fact, if I just even if I just delete this line 2 here, what if I just don't comment out, it's deleted? I have an empty function. Guess what? That's still going to return undefined. Everyone good? This is super critical. Understanding how to chain together returns is extremely important because in most cases, you're not going to have one function that returns a number and you're like, oh, great, let's just move on, right? Usually, especially in bigger databases, you're going to have things that return one thing that's going to return something else that you execute that's going to return something else. So it really is super important that you understand how returns work together, okay? Console logs have zero bearing on returns. Console logs do nothing. Console log is for the human. For any single code, or I shouldn't say for most of the code that you see where we're console logging something out, if you take out the console log, the code's going to run the exact same. It makes no difference. Okay, so never be seduced by this idea oh, this console log is saying it's doing this. Console logs mean nothing. It's literally just printing out a string of text that if you remove, the code's going to run the same exact way still. Okay. All right. So. Okay, so here I'm back now. I log out apples. I go to strings. Okay, great. So now I now uncomment out lines 5 through 10 or 6 through 10. Okay, and so now I have this. I've created this thing called calls func with hello. Okay, and I pass in this log as a string. What is log as a string? Or sorry, what is log a string here on line 11? Loudly, people, loudly. Come on. It's a function, right? Log a string is a function, and I define it here on line 1, right? I mean, it's pretty clear, right? This is log a string, and here I tell you what log a string is, right? So as far as I know on line 11 at least, log a string is a function, right? But I'm not invoking it, am I? Why not? Or how do you know I'm not invoking it? Right. Right now, this is a variable, right? If over here I say, hey, let's make log a string, equal to number 6, there's absolutely no difference, right? On line 11, I'm still just passing it in like with any other variable. Okay, so So I go in here, and then now it's like, well, I'm calling this calls func with hello function, right? Which is here on line 7. So let's go inside of here. I mean, essentially here, I'll just write as a comment, but kind of behind the scenes, what we're just saying is, hey, var func equals what? Log a string, which is what type of data? A function, right? So func is log a string, which is a function, right? So func is by transitive property what? Is a function, right? So func is a function. And so then we move to line 9 here now, and we actually execute func. Well, so what's another way to write func? Hello. I'll just write that as a comment down here. What's another way to represent this part here? Right? So this is identical in some ways to, if I wanted to, I could also write it as log a string hello. Right? Line 8 and line 9 are more or less equivalent in this case, right? Because log func is log a string. So when I invoke func, I'm basically invoking log a string. Ever get that part? Okay, cool. And so if I just kind of comment this out for now, or remove it for now, and I say, okay, great, I'm running log a string hello. So then I'm go back all the way over here, right? And so what is string in this case now? So var string equals what?
Hello.
What is it? Hello. Okay. Ever see that? Please tell me if this part doesn't make sense.
You're still calling out.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll get rid of this execution on line 6 then, just to make it really really clean. Okay. So now there's no more apples. Like nothing else is calling log a string except for this calls func with hello function. Okay. But does everyone see how we got here now? Yeah. Great. So when I run this, what's going to happen? Right.
And return undefined.
Yeah. And so if I was to, for example, I don't want to throw too many console logs in here because then it's going to make this confusing. But essentially, like if I run this code now, this hello that got printed, that comes from which line? Line 3, right? It's the only line on here that has a console log in it. But you can also just kind of follow through and say, okay, well, I'm console logging out a string there, and then where does undefined come from?
Oh, 9.
Line 9, right? And that's because what is happening here? This function is kind of quietly saying, oh, you didn't tell me to return anything, therefore I'm just going to return undefined on your behalf. And then what does this become here? Okay. So when I run that, what do I do?
Then you're not calling the function anymore.
Oh, haha, okay. Yeah, all right, if I just call func. If I call func hello, I mean, this is doing the same exact thing, right? And so that's how we ended up with console logging out the string hello, but then returning undefined.
with how it sits right now, with
Yep.
line 5 and apples being there,
Yep.
it should be a console should print apples, hello, and then undefined.
Yep.
So if you does it just execute like in order, I guess? Like string changes definition?
String changes definition.
Meaning at first it's apples and then it's hello. Like how does that work?
Well, yeah. I mean, like,
It's
so.
both things at different times?
Well, so like you know how like earlier we were talking about why Ian's solution like didn't always work, right? Was because the point of a function is it's very reusable, right? In this case, all we're really saying here is var string is equal to whatever is passed in, right? On line 6, we're passing in apples, so string's apples. On line 10 there, we're passing in hello, so string is hello, right? It's a reusable function, right? It's the same way how during the workshops, when you test something 2 or 3 times in a row, like, hey, like, let me feed you one array, let me feed you another array, right? I mean, the more detailed explanation is that in each case, you're spinning up a new instance of that function. But really, like, all that means to us at this point is just that, yeah, like, with the confines of this function, like, it is whatever you tell it it is, right, on that particular run. Because if we assume that line 2 runs every time you run a function, then, yeah, you know, we're going to reinstantiate everything that's passed in, right? Or we're going to reassign everything whenever it's passed in.
So you're just essentially calling it twice.
Yeah.
Times.
Yeah, I'm calling it twice, but with different inputs each time.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. So let's go back to the slide really quickly. We're close to halfway through here. Okay. So we've kind of come across that, and then here on the third iteration of this, right? Let's introduce a new function called add world, right? And what does this look like it's doing? It's adding.
To a string that's being passed in.
Right.
And then it's returning that.
Ellie, what is it doing? What is add world doing?
So it's calling on everything before and adding to the string, adding to the hello. So it would be hello.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like, so let's just ignore everything that's not line 13 through 15, right? If we just look at these 3 lines, what is this function doing?
Calling for the string world to come up.
Calling for a string world.
I mean,
So let me just be a little bit more clear with the definition here. What we're doing in this function called add world is we're returning a new string, right, that takes the text of the old string and combines it with this string that has the word world in it. Okay? So what does that mean? It means we're not changing this string here, right? Like, even though I guess technically we can't, but like the idea here is like we're returning a brand new thing, right? And we are returning it because before we're just logging it and it's fun and whatever, and no one really cares because it doesn't impact the code, right? But now it actually has some code implications because we are legitimately returning something now. We're actually saying this value is meant to be kind of given back to whoever called it, right? So that's lines 13 through 15. And then when we run through line 17, what do you expect to happen? I mean, I think the text is pretty straightforward, but let's just go with Remy. What do you think happens when I execute, let's say, only line 17 or line 18? Or what happens when I execute line 17 and 18? So when I run line 17, what happens first? Here, I'm just going to switch over to the REPL really quick. I'm actually going to uncomment out all of this, and I'm actually going to delete all this for now, okay, because it's not important to us right now, and I'll even delete this too. So this is just the code, right? I have a function, and then I call it on lines 5 and 6. So what happens when I run line 5? What executes first? If you were a computer, which part of line 5 would you be running first? Am I gonna write the am I gonna run the left side of the equal sign first or the right side of the equal sign first? The left side? The other one. Right? Remember what we always talked about? If I have something like, var David equals, 1 plus 2, we always evaluate the right hand side of the equal sign first. We figure out what 1 plus 2 is, which is 3, and then we assign David the value of 3, right? This is a little bit more complicated, but the same idea, right? We have an equal sign, but we can't do the left side first because we don't know what value to give it, right? So we run this first. Make sense? Okay, so then what line runs next then? So what line number is going to run next? This is going to run, and then I'm going to go to console log out result 1. But I haven't even finished figuring out what this side is yet. So what line runs next? There's 5 possible lines, and it's not line 7, and it's probably not line 5. What is this? What is this like? Explain to me what's happening here on this highlighted portion of the code. What's happening there? Like, what am I doing there? Like, not even with code, but just like with normal, if we're talking human to human, what's happening there? What am I doing? What is add world? Add world is, where does it say add world is a string? Or rather, where do I define what add world is?
What is a function?
Where does it say that? Okay, great. So add world is a function, right? That's where I define what add world is, and I'm telling you it's its function. Great. So if add world is a function, then what am I doing with it there on line 5? What's the character right after add world? What is that character? I've highlighted it for you. What is that character right there on line 5? I'm sorry? Yeah, I mean I've highlighted one character. It's in light blue. What kind of parentheses? Is it an open parentheses or a closed parentheses? Open, okay. And so I guess going back to what we talked about earlier in the class, if I have a function and I follow it up with an open parentheses, what am I doing with that function? Or let me phrase it another way. How do I invoke a function? Or how do I call a function? If I have a function here and I say, I'll call it, var David equals function. It doesn't take anything in, and all it does is console.log out David. How do I actually run that function?
So that's time nothing.
I'm sorry?
It's not gonna return nothing.
Well, no, it's sorry. I'm not asking what it returns. I'm asking you, what do I have to do to make this actually console log out David on the right hand side? Like assuming all of this doesn't exist anymore, or actually I'll just delete it. If I wanted to console log out David, what do I need to do? Because right now if I run this, nothing happens, right? But clearly I want to run it so that it console logs out David there on line 2. How do I do it?
We need to give value to David.
You need to give what?
To give the value to David.
Sorry, we need to give what?
We need to because David there is nothing in between parentheses.
Okay, so type for me here. You want to come up and just type for me? And sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot here because I know there are other folks in this class who are also having trouble like with this. Like, so this is not just you by any means, right? Like, there are other folks, and so this is why, like, when I ask, like, is everyone feeling good? Everyone nods, but then during the workshop, like this comes up where I'm like, okay, I have a function. How do we invoke it? And people are like, let me copy my problem from last night and just run it and just kind of change certain things, right? Like this is sometimes the hardest things because I think as an instructor, like this makes sense to like a lot of people who know this stuff pretty well, but then like we don't realize like, oh wow, this is like a very base thing that maybe just no one ever mentioned to anyone, right? So it's actually really hard to like if you miss this, it's hard to build on top of this, right? So you're not by any means the only person who's had problems with this, within the past day or so. So that's why I really want to call this out here. I have a function, it's called David, and I wanted to actually do what this function is supposed to do. How do I make it do that? Do you want to come up and type? how do I run that function? How do I invoke that function called David? Right. What was the character that I highlighted for you like previously?
Say that it has to run first on the right hand side of the function, but that case function is not defined.
Well, this has nothing to do with being defined or undefined right now, right? Like I have a function and it should just print out the word David. So the question now is how do I actually make it do that? Because right now when I run this, nothing happens, right? On the right hand side, I get back a bunch of things, which is fine, but I don't care about what's showing me. I care about what's not showing, right? It's not showing me that string David, and it should be because I'm console logging it out. So my question to you is how do I actually make a console log out David? What is missing here? Does that look familiar? What is line 5 doing now? I mean, at a very basic level, like this is a kind of thing that like I guess just for everyone's context, like this is the kind of thing that if you take the assessment or like like the interview or anything like that, this is the kind of stuff that they expect you to know kind of backwards and forwards, right? If you write a function, they ask you how do you invoke it, like that should be like an instinctual answer for you, right? It can't be something where it's like, oh, let me look on like previous exams or previous workshops, right? Like some of the concepts are like for example, what does slice do? You could like say I need to look that up. I didn't memorize like all the arguments of slice, right? And that's very fair. But there are also other concepts of JavaScript that are just like so core and so fundamental. And Remy is by no means the only person who Remy is not the only person who has trouble like even invoking a function, because I've seen it before when I walk around and when I look over the workshops, right? So like if this doesn't make sense, like let me know. Come see me after like this lecture, and like I'll be happy to go through this with you. But like if this is something that is something that is just you're not quite comfortable with yet, then I would argue that it's far more important for you to focus on this than it is to even kind of talk about some of like the other callback things that we're doing, right? Because JavaScript, like most computer languages, right, it really builds on top of one another, right? The way we teach this is we start with data, then we go to the different data types, and now we're teaching you how to use the data types, right? If you're not comfortable with the data, what data types are, then you're definitely not going to be comfortable with how to use them. And so it's not the kind of thing where you can just kind of close your eyes and hope that it goes away, because everything's going to build very much on top of one another. And if any of this doesn't make sense in the moment, it's not going to make sense down the road either. Okay, so just really quick, I just want to finish up this lecture here because I want to make sure we have enough time for the workshops too. So we have this add world hello, right? And so here on line 19, what I'm really doing in this highlighted portion is I have this function called add world, right? I'm invoking that function. I'm passing it to the argument what a wonderful. And so what is this variable string by line 15? What is a variable string here? Var string is equal to what a wonderful, right? And so then what is it returning now? Right? Right. And so let me just rewrite this, right? Let's say I have something called var new string. Oh. Var new string equals string plus world. And then I'm returning new string here. right? Don't let like that plus and equal like ever like don't let that hold you back. It's a shorthand. It's a convenience thing. If you ever see that and you feel like you're not comfortable with it, this is all it's doing, right? So feel free to write it out. From a code standpoint, this executes the same exact way. It will give you the same exact answer. But essentially, this is what we're doing. Is we're saying, hey, take that original string we had. Let's add the word world to it, capture it in a new string, and then we'll return that thing now, right? And so then, what is result 1 then by the time we get to line 21 here, or line 22? So what is result 1?
Missing space.
Yeah, probably. Cool. And so we console log it out, yeah, let's just change the spacing here. Pretty simple. Cool. Oh. Let me not run any of these two anymore. Cool. And then I get what a wonderful world. Okay. Do you see how we got there? Like, do you see how we did this, right? This is very straightforward. There's only we're just passing in one string, nothing fancy, right? The fancy and the confusing thing is probably going to happen now on line. Let me just delete all the things we don't need really quick so that we can just focus on what's important. Okay. Okay. Now, var result 2. Okay, so let's just go through this first, right? Okay. So var result 2. Here we're calling calls func with hello, right? And we're calling with add world. So, well, because I'm executing calls func with hello, let's actually go to where that is, which is on line 6, right? So here, oh, I already typed it out. Great. What is func equal to? Okay, so someone, Rocco, what is func equal to on line 7? Can you see, or should can we see, or should I zoom in more? Can anyone not see?
Is it equal to hello?
Is it equal to hello? Like that? Okay. Why would it be equal to hello?
Because it's calling out. And when it returns hello.
You mean on line 8?
Yeah.
But we're on line 7 now, right? We haven't even gotten there yet. So what's func on line 7? Okay. Well, where else do we see func? Where do we see func really in this function?
Only the parameter argument.
Here, right?
Yeah.
And what is a parameter?
The parameter isn't just argument.
Okay, and so what's the argument?
It hasn't been defined yet.
No, I think it has. But so I mean, look, this is something that we're just kind of we're defining with the function, right? But how do we get to line 6, or where do we come from?
It's the function.
Okay, so let's start from scratch, right? Let's say I'm a computer, right? You give me this line of code. I go through line 1 through 4, and I say, oh, okay, you're defining a function for me, right? But I don't do anything with it. So I move on to lines, let's say 6 through 9, right? Oh, great, you're defining another function, but you're not telling me to do anything with it. So I move on to lines 11 through 15, right? Oh, great, you're defining another function. Once again, I do nothing, right? So I keep moving on. And then I hit line 17. Okay, down here, line 17.
Oh, okay.
So what happens at line 17?
At line 17, then it goes back to add world, which,
Line 17, you say goes back to add world.
right?
Okay, so why does it go back to add world?
Because it's declaring it's called add world and the calls function hello.
Okay, so why do I go back to add world? This is just a variable right now. Why don't you go back to add world?
Because that it's declared as what it wants to return.
There's nothing
No,
about
there's no return.
there's nothing about returns yet, right?
Um,
So I guess I'll ask you the same thing as Remy, right? On line 17, what gets executed first? The left-hand side or the right-hand side?
Right.
Okay, and what is the right-hand side doing?
It is using the calls function with hello,
Okay,
and
what does using mean?
it's finding add world through the calls function hello.
It's finding add world.
Yeah.
What does finding add world mean?
It's
Is any function being invoked here on line 17?
I mean it is isn't it because it's taking the function calls with hello and then trying to find add world.
Okay, so fill in the blank for me here, okay?
Yeah.
Blank is being invoked with blank as the argument.
I mean calls with hello with add world as the argument.
Oh, so you're saying calls func with hello is being invoked.
Yes.
Okay, so that means we should go where then in our code?
Calls with hello.
Which is on line what?
6.
Okay, so we're on line 6 now. Okay, so far? Okay, and so here was where the original question was, well, so now we're on line 6, so I have this parameter called func, right?
So then that's add world.
So func is what?
Add world.
Okay, and what data type is add world?
Add world is a variable. No, it's a function.
It's a function. So that means func is what?
A function.
Okay, great. So we're there now, right? So we're now in a stage where we kind of we feel pretty good about what line 7 is telling us, right? Func is add world because add world is the argument that we calls func with hello with, right? Notice how by the time we get to line 7, we haven't touched this at all yet. Add worlds could be almost anything. It could be a number, it could be a boolean. We don't care, right? We just know that func is equal to it, or it references it right now. We don't even know it's by value or by reference, right? Because we don't know what data type it is for now. Okay? And then, so then we do line 7 kind of implicitly behind the scenes, kind of shadowy kind of stuff. And then we move on to line 8 now, right? Where we say, okay, return func hello. Okay? So let me just let me rephrase this a little bit so we can just kind of take it take it a little bit slower. So let's say var temp equals func hello, and then I return temp. Okay? This is the same thing as return func hello. Okay? It does the same exact thing. I'm just putting an intermediary step there so it makes it easier for us to talk about. Okay, that's all I'm doing here. I'm just making it easier for us to talk about, okay? Okay, so let's go to line 8 now. Var temp equals func hello. Kevin, how do I evaluate line 8? Okay. And so how do I evaluate the right hand side? So what's func? Sorry, what? Okay, func is a parameter, right? So, but in context of line 8 there, what is func right now? Func is a string. What is func? And what function is it? Okay, so what you're saying is this thing is basically equal. So I could also just write something like, oh, you're saying that those two are equal then. Okay, good. So then, okay, great. So now that I know that func is add world, I mean, I should have wrote it here, right? Like now that we know that func is add world, how do we evaluate that? How do we evaluate the right hand side of the equation then? Well, so where do I go next? Line 12. Okay, great. So here, obviously, let's change this now. What is string in this case? Okay. And what's new string in this case? Okay, so I'm just gonna make it super clear. what new string is. New string is equal to hello space world. And so what do I do with new string now on line 16? Okay, so this is going to return hello world. Okay, and then so what is temp then? Great. Great. Everyone follow how we got here? Okay. So what's result 2 then in this case? Because now I finished calling this calls func with hello, right? So what's result 2 now?
Hello world.
Right. And so when I execute this, it will print out hello world. Okay. Yeah. This is actually really interesting because I think I both like and don't like putting people on the spot, right? Because I think I think a lot of you have come to me afterwards and said, well, David, the slides are really easy, but the workshops are all really, really hard. But in actuality, the slides are not easy, right? It's just easier for us to kind of feel like we know what's going on without actually examining if we actually truly understand what's on the page, right? And I apologize if I'm kind of bull rushing through it in some cases, but even with this one, right? I think if I just kind of glance around and say, does everyone understand what's going on? There will be a lot of, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. But then when I put you on the spot and ask people to explain it, we kind of see oh, there is kind of this dissonance between seeing it on the page and seeing the answer versus actually having to reasoning your way through it kind of step by step. Claire?
Why is it still returning undefined?
Great question. Why is it returning undefined? I mean, I'll leave that up to Kelly. Why is it returning undefined? Actually, that's good. I'll just, anytime anyone asks a question, I'll just ask someone else answer on my behalf.
Well, it's returning new string, so when it's console logging results.
Yep. So this
console logging result 2.
right.
So
So
returning it.
right. So this line, I guess 22 is trust me on this one. On line 22. We console log a hello world, right? And I think Claire's question is, okay, so where does undefined come from?
So is it because console log is the last line?
Yes, and I mean console log just prints out anything, right?
No, I know. I guess my question is when we talked about this before.
Yeah.
Both of the functions result to are using both return something.
Yeah.
So I don't understand.
Yeah.
Why
Well, so you're right. So add world is returning new string, right? And that's being captured by temp, right? Temp or calls func with hello is returning temp, and that's being captured by result 2. So far we returned 2 things, and they're both being captured by variables. Now, what's missing here? So let's say I want to return, Claire, right? Shoot! Oh, repo. God, I hate you. Okay. Sorry, I'm just gonna write this really quick. So dumb.
Should that work? Not on record.
It would work, yes, not on repo.
You have return.
Oh, God, okay, this is just annoying now. Does this work? Okay, I'm not a fan of how this is working out. Essentially, the reason why the reason why over here we're returning undefined is because there's nothing being returned to the kind of the global scope, if you will.
Oh, I see.
Right? We capture this output here and we print it out, which is great. But then the computer's okay, great. On this global execution scheme, you're not telling me to return anything.
It's just being returned to the variable, not
Right. Right. So it's kind of it's like you have a bunch of intermediary returns, people are returning things, and it's all good. But then it's at the end, it's okay, great. What do you want me to return? And I'm not telling you to return anything. So just like all the other scopes, it's going to return what? Undefined. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess now that we've kind of like exhausted that workshop, the rest of this should be super simple then. I mean, in this case, like it's literally the same exact idea here, where we have this function called calc, right? And now we're basically just we're calling it, but we're feeding in, add and subtract, which are their own functions, right? So very much like earlier how we were doing with like call func with hello, log a string, etc. All we're doing here is kind of doing the same exact thing and telling you, hey, you can pass in a function as an argument, and then within the other functions you can actually call it. Same idea, right? So feel free to look at it. I'm not gonna walk through this in as much detail because I want to make sure you have time to work on the workshop. But conceptually, everything here we've kind of already talked about in the previous example too. Okay. Set interval is interesting. It's like another kind of JavaScript reserved thing. Set interval actually is somewhat useful in the real world scenario. And so this is obviously something that's kind of more memorized. But what set interval does is it's a function, okay, and you don't need to define it because it's kind of almost like a reserved function in JavaScript. Like just assume you have it. It takes in 2 arguments, right? The first argument takes in will be a function, okay? And the second function will be a number, right? And what it really does is it will actually just execute this first argument every number of milliseconds, whatever you give it to the second argument. So in this case, we have this thing called log counter, right? And it just prints out a number, really, right? It prints out like counter is blank, right? And we're giving it 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So when I start running this, all it's going to do is say, great, execute log counter, wait a second. Execute log counter, wait a second. Execute log counter, wait a second. Over and over again until I tell it to stop eventually. Okay, so this is another. You can come through here if you want. Let's go. Yeah, you're like 3/4 of the way out already. You might as well. Anywho, but yeah. So so this is just another example of using a callback, right? We're giving it a function that we're gonna call over and over and over again. So once again, same concept, right? We can take functions, we can pass it to other functions, and the other functions can call it.
It's a real world example. Sorry.
I mean, if I want to make a countdown clock,
Okay.
right? So if I want to do something like set interval, and then I want to do function. I'll just do anonymous function, or hopefully they'll let me do an anonymous functions. Let's do console dot. Oh, that would trigger it. Never mind. Console.log 10 foo minus, and then we'll do it once every 1,000 milliseconds to see if this works. See? Yeah. Ignore the 1 as returning true by default. But yeah, I mean that's like a real example, right? And in fact, this isn't smart enough to know that I want to have a 0. And really, why should it, right? Like, there's a very real possibility that I might want to go until -100, -5,000, right? So it's going to keep running until I kill it. So it will keep going until I think it reaches -65,000. And the reason why is because computers, like, the max and min numbers you can store in 1 byte is 60-some thousand, so it'll probably stop there. Or it might keep going, actually. I don't know. REPL might just be smart enough to give it more memory if it gets to a certain point. But
You can test it by putting the interval down to
yeah,
0.001.
yeah, I could. At some point, REPL does break, so I'm just gonna assume that like that's I don't need to do that. Actually, I think REPL already broke. Oh no, actually refreshed. But yeah, that's an example of when set interval really helps, right? Set interval is actually really good for an undefined thing. So what is I guess this is kind of a different application, but you know how like if you're designing a website, there's this concept of throttling, right? Which is that like some people might just click on a button once and it might take 5 seconds to do something, right? That same person, another person might also be super impatient and they might click it, nothing happens, so they keep clicking over and over again, right? In that case, you don't want it to trigger like 5,000 versions of the same thing. So what you actually want to do is you want to have a set interval that kind of tracks it to say like, hey, only execute this once every second, right? If they click a million other times, ignore it, right? But if they click it again a second later, execute it, and so on and so on and so forth. So there are definitely applications. It actually is like probably one of the more like applicable like real world things that happen, because a lot of times we do want things to happen on the staggered time interval delay. And then lastly, this is this hopefully is a little bit more clear now to all of you. But like in the same way that we can pass in functions as arguments, we can also return functions, right? Because at this point, greeter is what? It's just a function, right? So we can return it, we can capture it elsewhere, we can do other things with it. Just to hit that point home, right? We're just treating functions like we do any other data type, like it's an object, like it's an array, like it's a string or a boolean even, right? So the same way that we can pass it in somewhere, we can also return it out somewhere too.
Recalling that, the very last line,
That was confusing.
the gen greeter double.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so actually let's just do that one really quick. So in the same way that you can nest like indexes, like you have nested arrays, you can say index 1, index 0. You guys should also do that with functions too, right? Because conceptually it's like it's very much the same exact thing. So let me see if I can copy this code. Yes, copy it. Great. Much success. Yeah, great. All right. Okay, great. So, what this is shorthand for on line 10 here is saying, hey, let's say I have this called var temp equals gen greeter executed, right? And then here I'm just going to do temp. Oh, not that. So that's all this line is showing, right? That if I know gen greeter is going to return a function, rather than capturing it in a temporary variable and then invoking it, let's just invoke it right away, right? In the same way that if I have a var arr and it's 1, 2, 3, right? I could say var temp arr is equal to arr index 0. And then I could also do, temp arr index of 0, right? And this is equivalent to arr index of 0, index of 0. Does that make sense, everyone? Right? Once again, shorthand, convenience. You can make everything one line for now, even if you feel more comfortable, because you can actually see what code is being run. But these are all just maps. Sorry, can you see it? I know it's on the bottom of the page. I'll move it up a little bit. No. Right here, we've nested before, and it's been because AR zeros can give us an array, so we know we can get index of that. Here we know gen greeter is going to give us a function, so we know we can execute that. So we might just execute them in sequence, right? Because once again, JavaScript goes from left to right, right? So it's going to read gen greeter first and say, oh, okay, what do you give me? A function. Okay, and you want me to execute it. Great, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And then we keep moving on. Yeah.
So it's possible to invoke like larger function or parent function without invoking the child function that's nested within it?
If the parent function invokes a child function, then you're going to invoke it.
But if you run that, so then why would that?
Because gen greeter is returning another function.
Right. Sorry. So here's the context for it. Gen greeter, this thing here, it's returning this greeter function.
Oh.
So let me put this another way. So then what temp is actually equal to? So here I can actually also say var temp var temp is equal to that. Oh, sorry. 192. Okay. So var temp is equal to the output of GenGreeter, which is also equal to this. Right? Because what line 16 is telling us to do is like, hey, whatever GenGreeter returns, let's assign temp to reference that. Well, if we look at the example here, what is GenGreeter returning?
Returning greeter, which is greeter's nested within GenGreeter, right? Or am I just?
Yeah, no, it is necessary, right? Like here we say GenGreeter. Okay, so if it looked like this, for example, I feel like you would have no problems understanding this, right? Greeter's a variable, and I return, or sorry, greeter is an array,
Yep.
and I return the array,
Okay.
right?
Following.
Same exact idea. GenGreeter is a function, and we return the function, right? At no point inside of this GenGreeter function do you ever see greeter followed by an open and closed parentheses, right? Which means at nowhere inside this function are we ever running GenGreeter. We're never invoking that function.
So what would happen if you, at the bottom you just had GenGreeter with one parenthesis? Would it return undefined?
Well, no. If I had GenGreeter with one parenthesis, that's what I have right here, right? That would just say, hey, what is GenGreeter returning?
Oh, so would it?
Mm,
So it would return a function of the extra parentheses is even necessary if you're gonna run the whole function, right? Yeah, I guess.
let's return this. Okay, so let's just look at this right now. Okay, let's ignore like all of this stuff. Okay. Inside GenGreeter, let's say GenGreeter was an array, okay, and it's 1, 2, okay, and I say, hey, you know, GenGreeter, let's say I say var temp equals GenGreeter, and I console log out temp. What is that going to give me? Which is
So array.
what?
The arrays.
Of
1 and 2. Greeter.
that makes sense, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then if I do this, what is temp now?
Yeah, 1.
Why?
Because GenGreeter, because temp is now returning. Temp is GenGreeter, which is returning greeter, and the first element in greeter is 1.
Right. Like basically we're replacing GenGreeter now with 1, 2, right? And then we're saying, hey, what's the first index of, or what's the first element in you, right? Okay, great. So that makes sense. So then now if we go back now to what we had earlier and say, okay, great. Now what if GenGreeter is a function? And it also does is console log out Alex. Okay? Good so far?
Yes.
If I was to remove this index, obviously, just do this now. What's temp, or what's going to print out here?
Alex.
You haven't called.
Because we haven't invoked. Because we haven't invoked anything. Yeah, because
What is greeter?
yeah, we haven't. We've invoked GenGreeter, but we haven't invoked greeter, so that's why we need the second one.
Exactly.
That was my.
Cool. Yeah, I mean greeter like if I think where I was going with this like at this point if this is all we see, greeter can be anything. It can be a function, it can be 0, it can be any value, and it doesn't really matter, right? What the reason why we know that it's a function is because we're gonna say, hey, let's invoke it again, right? Let's do something with whatever this returns, and so then at a certain point, then this becomes greeter, right? Invoked.
Feedback for the like slides.
Yeah.
Those are two not so great named functions for understanding.
Gen greeter and greeter.
Should be like outer and inner or something. It just like that's not easy to follow if you're thinking about it that way.
Yeah, a lot of these variables are not the best named.
Could you just invoke greeter higher up in the return?
Can I invoke greeter higher up in the return?
Like, where's return greeter? Can you return greeter with parentheses?
Like here, you mean?
Yeah, will that work?
So what would that give us?
Will that call it right there? And then, temp would be
So what would be console logged out then if I ran this? Ian, because you asked.
greeter console temp, which is calling gen greeter. So it's gonna come all about bottom's gonna return greeter called.
Didn't follow that. What's gonna console log here in white? What text should I see in white? Yeah.
Because before we were just returning greeter, but then it hadn't been called yet.
Yep.
So I'm trying to sneak early and trying to call it early, but it's not gonna work because
Why not?
it will work.
It return function.
Okay, so okay, so let's just say okay. So who wants to kind of so if I run this right now, right? There's gonna be white text and there's gonna be green text. Who wants to tell me what the white text is gonna say and what the green text is gonna say? Alex.
Well, wait, my hypothesis that the white text will say Alex because you're returning the invocation. You're returning reader and invoking it in that line.
And then the green text?
Undefined because we still are not returning. We're returning something within the nested function, but not the. Wait.
It is confusing.
It's one of those things where you just
That's
kind
what
of
I wanted to just answer.
Trust me. Okay, white text Alex. White text says Alex. Green text is undefined. Pedro, what's your guess?
I think we're still gonna get like gen greeter is still gonna return undefined because greeter is not
White text and green text.
Okay. White text is gonna be undefined and Alex.
Okay. In what order? Sorry, I should specify that. I'll just put your name, but do you want it before or after Alex?
It's gonna return Alex first, I think,
Okay. And then undefined.
and then undefined.
Okay. And then what's green text gonna return?
Green's undefined.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
Do you agree, Shatavia? Alright, just gonna- I sorry, I'm butchering this probably. I'm really sorry, but
The second A is the E.
second A is an E.
Yep.
Cool. It's okay. I think anyone can read that and know, have a good sense of who I was trying to
Yeah.
spell there. Okay. Anyone else? Any other guesses? Yeah. Yeah, Claire.
I think it would be the same as
Which is
function in white
function in white and green undefined. Okay. Any other guesses?
Like I'm not sure about the order of Alex and undefined, but I feel confident.
I'm not sure, but I feel confident.
I feel confident that those things will be part of the console.
Okay. Any other guesses?
Wait, can you explain your thinking for why?
Mm-hmm. we are calling GenGreeter, and GenGreeter returns a call to greeter, and when you call greeter, you console log Alex, so that's definitely happening. And then it returns whatever greeter was returning. Since greeter is not returning anything, it's going to return undefined. And then we're console logging temp, which is undefined. That's why it's undefined.
Where is it returning? But why would it console log out undefined?
Because that's what GenGreeter is returning. GenGreeter is returning whatever greeter is returning, and that's undefined.
Why would it return Alex at all? It's just a console log.
Because we've called it. As long as you call the function, it's going to do whatever is inside the brackets.
And remember, the log is just printing.
Come on, let's see it.
No, this is a lot more interesting trying to like. Well, no, like once I tell you the answer, you're like, oh yeah, David, that makes perfect sense, right? And then you're all in the workshop, you're like, this makes no sense, David. I'm like, Claire.
I didn't realize return was outside of the greeter function.
Okay, so do you want to change your answer then?
Yeah.
To
So it would be Alex.
so you're basically in Camp Alex then, like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
So we can see what it
Sorry. Let me turn off my. That was not appropriate. I'm so sorry. And now, and you never will. Actually, you'll see in the video, but it's whatever.
We got you.
There was some profanity in there, so I apologize for that. Okay, but you'll see it if you want to look like an hour and a half into the video, you'll come across it. Anywho, okay, so Claire and Alex think the white text will say just say Alex, green text will say undefined. Shatavia and Pedro are going to say white is going to say Alex and undefined, and then undefined, and then the green text is going to be undefined still. Anyone feel differently about those answers?
I'm in the first camp.
You're in the
But
Claire Alex camp?
Not confidently.
All right, I'll just put Lewis.
Very, like 51%.
I agree with
Who's set Mal? Me.
Same thing.
It's also one of those weird things where, like, you know how, like, when you're in a big group, like, who said that? It's like, me. I'm like, not the most helpful answer there. Okay, cool. All right, so it sounds like we're pretty universally agreed upon that green is going to be undefined. Okay, cool. All right, so, well, I mean, I guess, ta-da. All right, so I guess, like, so in my mind, you know, like, if I was to look at this thing, I would think about it in two ways, right? One is, okay, I see two console logs in the same, right? Is greeter ever being invoked anywhere?
Yeah.
Do I see greeter with an open and closed parentheses anywhere on this page, right?
I didn't see the second console log. I'm sorry.
You were looking at it for 20 minutes, Alex. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's only 10 lines on this page, and so.
That's why I was so confused. I was like, why would that console log add an undefined randomly?
Right. Okay. So anywho, so we have console log Alex here, right? And then we have another console log here. So at the very least, I should be seeing two console logs, right? So it's just a matter of what's in the first console log and what's in the second console log. The first console log is pretty straightforward, right? There's not really much room for interpretation there. It's going to return the string Alex. So that's what we see here, okay? The second one, I guess to Pedro's point, is we return greeter, right? So if I was to put a variable, did I use temp already? Dang it. Okay, I'll use new temp. This is how you're not supposed to create variable names, by the way. So if I create variable called new temp equals greeter then, and then I return new temp, it's going to do the same thing as before, right? Except now, if I actually console log out what new temp is actually equal to what? Shatavia, what is new temp?
New temp would be equal to the greeter, but then going back into greeter, the function is undefined.
So what's new temp?
Oh. Undefined.
Exactly. So then we're going to return undefined to genGreeter, right? So now this is going to be undefined. And then at some point, we're just going to be logging out undefined. And that's what we're seeing here. Pretty much it, right?
Sneaky second console.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
yeah, maybe like for the rest of these lectures, like I really should just like I think like maybe these slides aren't as simple as as you might have thought they were for the first like 4 days of this bootcamp prep session. Yeah, I might just do that. I might just make you guys try to like guess answers now. I might just make this a lot more reflective of what you'll actually see in the workshops, right? Because I think these are the things that like if you just kind of nod along now when you do the workshops, like they're going to be confusing, and you won't have the power of a crowdsourced solution to get there. Okay, cool. So yeah, so good question, Lewis. Took us on a 30-minute detour, but it was great because now I think we're just kind of getting more and more comfortable, right? Getting more experience with it, right? This is one of those things where, like, people might just think I understand it, but then if I make you actually go through step by step and guess what the answer is, like, you might realize that, hey, your understanding isn't as good as you might have thought you were, or you might have thought it was. Okay, and so lastly is this idea of scope, right? So scope is kind of always going to be there no matter what. It's kind of like pass by reference versus pass by value. You can't really ignore it. JavaScript's going to make you use it. And so what this really means is just that the scope of a, so you know how like within a certain scope, right? You know how like parents can look, like child scopes can look in their parent scopes, but parent scopes can't look in their children's scopes, right? And so all this is saying is that the scope of a particular function is determined by where the function is defined, okay? And so in this example over here, I guess it's a little bit hard to follow, right? But actually, no, this is the same thing as genGreeter. We just renamed some of the names here. So in greet, we have this thing where we print out name, right? And so if I was running this function kind of in sequence, you'd be like, well, it kind of makes sense, right? Because function or greet is looking for name. Is it in its scope? No, it's in its parent scope, right? Name equals to Susie. So when I run greet, it's going to print out hello Susie. Right? And so that's where we get down here. And like I guess like this. Oh, right here. Yeah. So then if we move down here now, we're kind of doing something that's very, very similar, right? The first like 8 lines of this code isn't really changing too much yet. What does change is rather than having a function and then calling it here where it's very clear what's happening, we actually return a function, right? And we return a function, but when we call it still knows to look for Susie, right? And so all this is saying is that because the function greet was made inside this make greeting function, the scope for this is always going to be here, right? So I can move this anywhere else that I want, but when I call it still, the scope is always going to be where it was created, right? So just look to see where the short version of this is like, if you're ever calling a function and you're not sure where its scope is, look for the lines in which it's defined and just pretend the code is executing there, because that's where its scope is going to be. Cool. I mean, not cool. Like I guarantee you, when you start doing this, you'll be like, "This makes 0 sense." But like at a high level, just kind of like take that and note, and then when you work on the problems, hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear, kind of like the application of this. But just like the scope of a function is always going to be tied to where the function is defined. So literally find those lines of code in your page, and just say, okay, if I was here right now, what scope do I have? That's the scope that function is going to have no matter where you take it. It could be on the bottom of the page, it could be the first line of the page, wherever it is. Like the scope is always going to come back to where it's defined. Cool. All right, let's go through some of the workshop problems really quickly, and then I'll probably do what I did. I think I might be running really low on time though. That lecture took way longer than I wanted to. Okay. So, okay.
That was the most helpful lecture, though.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Who knows if it'll translate to doing the problems faster, but
I mean, yeah, I might just make you guys do all the slides yourself then, if that's what it takes. Okay, so there's quite a few problems. I'll probably do the same thing where I guess because we did take so long with the slides, I won't do the first problem with you all because I think we kind of did that already by going through the slides in more detail. And you can actually tell me if tonight's workshop is a bit easier because of that. And then we can maybe schedule Saturday's classes accordingly. So the questions, right? The first one is called function logger. And this one basically what it's doing is that it basically is trying to help you write a function. And then it also wants to take in an argument that you then pass into that function, right? So you know how with set interval, it took a function, right? And it took the number of milliseconds it takes to run, right? What it's saying is, hey, write set interval where it takes the same thing, except it actually feeds that second argument into the first function, right? So conceptually it's doing very, very similar. It's just having you be even more detailed about how you run certain things. I think the example here that they're giving is pretend you have a function that returns the square root of a number, right? Pretty straightforward. But then what if you actually also need to figure out what number to put in, right? What if I give you that function, I give you the number, and I tell you to run those things together? How would you do it? Finder function. Next question. So we can build index of, what is this one again? Okay. The finder function is something that we're actually going to talk about tomorrow. There'll be kind of a built-in way to do it. But for now, what this is asking you to do is you're going to take in, as the lesson indicates today, you're going to take in a function as one of your arguments, and you're also going to take in array as a second argument, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to run every element of that array through the first function to figure out, and I guess in this case, if it's even or not, just to run it through, right? And so an application of this is normally we say we have a for loop. We say, hey, if array index of I modulo 0 or modulo 2 equals to 0, right? Now we're going to do that, but rather than trying to write that out ourselves, we're just going to use a function to say, hey, let's pass array index of I as an argument into a function and see what we get back. Okay. So basically, it's a way to create essentially a filter, and you will learn about filters more tomorrow, or on Saturday. But essentially, it's just a way to create a filter. Times table. This one is pretty straightforward. We only take in one number, and then all it's doing is it basically takes in that number, or rather it stores that number and then just multiplies that number with whatever number you give it next. So in this case on line 1, we have this variable called 9 tables, right? And it's equal to times table. It's gonna equal to whatever times table returns when you feed a 9, but then we're gonna be able to invoke nine tables again. So just really quickly at a high level, what does that tell us? What is time? Who has an answer? And I'll go back to where I started. Ellie, what does that tell me that times table should be returning? Well, just what data type should times table be returning? I'm sorry? Value. Okay, what data type? Primitive or non-primitive, and which subsegment of those?
Primitive?
Well, so let me just copy and paste this into the repo really quick. Okay. Here we're doing something like this, right? Everyone see this? Everyone actually look here because this is super important. So let's forget what the problem tells you the answer is, because that's going to be super misleading, right? Then we're kind of defaulting to our old behavior of, oh, let's look at the answers and not all of them make sense, right? So let's say that isn't there. my question is, what is times table 9 returning? Okay, and like I'll just frame it like this, right? Times table 9 is returning something. That something is being stored by this nines table variable. Good? And then what are we doing with the 9 tables variable on line 2 there? Jadavia? We're invoking it. So what does that mean? What data type is 9's table? A function. And so that means what is times table returning? Another function, right? Essentially, this is the same as writing this. Right? Okay? So like the answers are going to tell you something, but the answers does not like don't let that be a crush for thinking about what the right answer. Like you should never work backwards. Like, well, the answer is 72, so therefore let me just answer let me answer this in terms of like this is going to return a string, right? It's like no, like look at the way the problem is set up, and you should be able to tell right away at least kind of like at what point what's going in and what's coming out, right? And so in this case, times table is going to have to return a function to us because guess what? We invoke whatever is being returned in the next line. If it's anything that's not a function, we're going to get an error, right? It's going to say 0 can be invoked or string can be invoked, or object can be invoked. So, that's just kind of like the hint, I guess, for this particular problem. Builder. This one is, this is the one that's like always like a bit annoying to do. Because like I think people sometimes get lost in like the question itself and like they kind of miss the point. But essentially the idea is, hey, like there are like different cities have different tax rates. So if I give you, so let's build this out so that if depending on the input I give you, you run certain functions, right? You create a function for like to calculate, I think the New York tax rate versus the New Jersey tax rate, right? So the idea is like based on the input, how would you change what function gets returned or what function gets run? Partial. Okay. So what partial does is, and I think the problem actually lays it out very well, is a lot of times when we run a function, what we do is we actually like some of the arguments might be different, but also sometimes a lot of them are the same, right? So in this example here, it's like, well, if we want to scrape different parts of the Twitter URL, right, we're always going to go to twitter.com. It's just a matter of, what artist or what name we go there afterwards. And so in order to keep our code dry, as in like, we don't repeat too much of our code, what we actually do is we actually, see, the way they want you to do this, okay. They basically want you to, you're going to give it a function that takes 2 arguments, and it's actually going to store one of those values, and it's going to give you back a function that's now supposed to take only 1 value, right? So in this case, if I say, get me URL sites, and I give it Twitter plus artist name, it's going to give me back a function that only requires the artist name, because the Twitter part is kind of assumed, right? So think about scope. Think about how that works. Think about returning functions. Okay, and then logger array. Yeah, the name is pretty straightforward here. Yeah, I mean the prompt is pretty straightforward. I'll probably do a worse job of describing it than you just reading it. But yeah. So there are a lot of problems. The good news is, we don't have class tomorrow, so I guess if you were planning on it being a day off, then I'm sorry. But all that means is that you have a lot more time to work on these problems. And so yeah, I mean, I'll slack out pairs. You'll work on it for the rest of this class, and I guess just to kind of push you all. Yeah. Okay. So here's how I'll do this. Okay. So someone on the server response, which 2 more of you filled out, so thank you for that. So now we're at like 20% coverage. It's almost like the real U.S. democracy. So the goal there is to say that like, so one of you asked, like, am I going to have access to all these resources, workshops, solutions, whatever after I leave? Yes, you will, right? So because of that, and because we have 1 more day left, I'm not in as big of a rush to show you the answers right away, because in my mind it's like, well, if I give you the answers, like the goal is for you to do the problems, right? Like seeing the answers may or may not help you. We only have one day anyway, and you'll get all the solutions at worst scenario like Saturday afternoon, right? So you guys can work on the workshops today, and even tomorrow, but I won't open up the solutions because I really want all of you to just, on your free time with your own schedule, try your absolute hardest to do these problems. We have a Slack channel, right? So if you want to work with somebody, pair with someone, feel free to DM them, set up like a vid share session or whatever it is to work on them. But I really want you all to work on them yourself, like actually do the problems, not just look at the solutions and try to make sense of it. And then I can probably go through them first thing Saturday. Saturday is going to be our last day, so we obviously want to make the most of it. We're learning recursion, which is a bit of a mind trip. So it's a fairly difficult concept. We won't be going too deep into it, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. At the same time, Saturday is also the last time we'll be meeting as a group, so I want to make sure that if there's any lingering questions, we still cover those. So if there's any particular questions, workshop questions, or just concept questions that you want me to go over, like feel free to Slack them to me. And what I'll do is on Saturdays, so Saturday, please come on time. Like we're going to start at 10. We're going to go through these problems. We're going to go through the 3 workshops that we're scheduled for. And then at the end, if I have an extra like half hour to an hour, I can also go through any reviews of previous concepts. And the goal there is so you leave feeling like you at least have most of your kind of burning explicit questions answered. And then we get pizza too. And then feel free to bring your own beverage of choice. Everyone's over 21, right? I'm so sorry. Not like sorry for you, but like you'll get there eventually. But just like I didn't mean to put you on the spot or anything. You're good. Okay. Yeah. I mean, and the reason why is we sometimes have beer in the fridge, but like obviously if there's like minors on campus, we can't do that. So, but we should be fine, right? Please tell me. Please don't like get us arrested. Like it's so silly. Okay. Awesome.
I have to look around like.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I thought you weren't 21 yet. I was like, oh,
No.
I'm really, really sorry for putting you on the spot. All right, cool. All right, let's get to it.